Right friends, welcome back to newspaper editorials discussion, and today after going through several newspapers, not many important editorials are there, and today I am going to discuss on GST. Some further developments took place. The second one is with regard to the vulnerability of the job market. These two important issues I am going to deliberate, and this is with regard to the resolution of a GST stalemate between states and centre. And yesterday GST Council meeting was held and some important decisions were taken. The contextuous issue of this who will administer up to what extent, what is the centre's power as well as what are the state's powers, this was solved. The most important aspect is here states will administer 90% of the taxpayers with less than 1.5 crore turnover. When the turnover of the taxpayers is less than 1.5 crore, 90% of them will be administered by the states, 10% will be by the centre. And if the taxpayer income or the turnover is more than rupees 1.5 crore, so it is basically turnover. So if the taxpayer's turnover is more than rupees 1.5 crore, it will be 50-50. This important development yesterday. And second point is each SSC assessed by only one authority, so as to avoid duplication and at the same time so as to avoid unnecessary harassment. Each SSC will be assessed by only one authority, that means either by the centre or by the states, and July 1 is going to be the date for implementation instead of April 1. Then if someone talks about GST, this is one classic example of a cooperative federalism. Anyone can ask you in the examination. GST is an example of cooperative federalism. And goods and services tax, we deliberated in detail. 31st week of 2016, separate capsule number 6. If you want what is meant by goods and services tax, please view that capsule. And if you look at further developments yesterday, intelligence based enforcement powers will vest with assessing officers of both centre and the states, and centre will levy and collect IGST. The GST has got three components. One component is central GST, state GST, integrated GST. Integrated GST is basically between interstate supply of goods and services. Two aspects, don't forget, because some of you may not be aware about IGST. IGST is on interstate supply of goods and services, that is one aspect. The second one is on import of goods and services. So these two form part of integrated GST. So this is very much important. And the next point is states will have power to levy tax on economic activity within 12 nautical miles of territorial waters. The economic activity up to 12 nautical miles in the territorial waters will be taxed by the state. Here centre has given that power to states. Actually it comes under the purview of centre, but with the concept of cooperative federalism, centre has given this to the states. And here we deliberated about this territorial waters in the capsule, this UNCLOS 28th week. If you want more, please listen to that. And here territorial waters up to 12 nautical miles from the baseline, and exclusive economic zone up to 200 nautical miles. So here in the territorial waters, innocent passage is to be given to the ships, and here in exclusive economic zone, foreign nations have the freedom of navigation and overflight. These things we deliberated in detail. Territorial waters, what are the governments, what are various nations rules and regulations to be followed when it comes to territorial waters as well as exclusive economic zone, we have deliberated. And now let us look at some few aspects, problems which necessitated GST. I am going to deliberate three aspects. You can go through the capsule which I have mentioned just now, but for 2-3 minutes I will look at what are the problems which necessitated the introduction of GST, and the next I am going to deliberate on advantages to the government, advantages to industry. So, after deliberating all these things, then we will switch over to vagaries of job market. This is one very, very important article, and if you look at the problems which necessitated GST, I deliberated in that capsule, please view that, but some points I am just listed out, I have just listed out here. The first one is cascading effect of taxes. Yesterday we deliberated about what is the meaning of cascading effect of taxes. Some taxes by state governments, some taxes by center, and proper input credit is not there in several cases. Because of this, tax on tax cascading effect is taking place. Then second point is taxes levied by the central government are not available to set off against the taxes being levied by the state governments. What I have told you, taxes levied by the state, taxes levied by the center, there is no input credit mechanism in most of the cases. Then variety of tax laws with disparate tax returns and dissimilar tax practices from one state to other state. Comparison is also very difficult because each and every state taxes are different. Then creation of tariff, non-tariff barriers in the form of octroi, entry tax checkposts at several of the checkposts from one state to the other state. Normally this long queue of trucks, that is the common sight, and now with the introduction of GST that will go away and interstate barriers will go away, and because of interstate barriers the industrial sector is facing high compliance costs. So, the high compliance costs for the taxpayers will go away, and so far business decisions are based on the environment in particular state, and industrialists are avoiding particular states. So, in future, in fact, India entire country will become a common market. So, business decisions at present are based on tax considerations rather than logical economic factors. So, this will become history once this GST comes in. So, GST is expected to come into force from 1st July instead of 1st April, and how it is advantageous to the government. The biggest advantage is it will act like a common national market. State barriers will go away, it will act like common national market, and it will give boost to not only make in India but also foreign investment, and foreign investment in future will not depend on state wise or sectoral wise. Then prevent cascading of taxes as input tax credit is available at each and every stage of value addition. When the value addition takes place in some particular product, because of unified tax structure, input tax credit will be there. Because of input tax credit, then what will happen? Cascading effect of taxes will be eliminated. Then eliminate rate arbitrage among the states. So, at present state to state it is different, so that rate arbitrage will be eliminated. So, that is why India will really work like a common national market. Then compliance will increase, because at each and every stage of value addition, this input tax credit is to be taken, and for taking input tax credit, now there is every possibility that more and more stages will come into the tax slab or tax net, tax base will widen. Then the next point is common procedures for registration of taxpayers, refund of taxes, uniform format of tax returns, everything will become uniform. So, once it becomes a uniform, then automatically transparency will increase, then greater use of information technology will increase the transparency, and now it will be real national treatment principle will be applicable. WTO's foundation is, one of the foundations is national treatment principle. Here domestically we should not discriminate between the foreign products. And in our country at present, the distinction, or you can say the discrimination is going on from one state to other state because of multiple taxes and different taxes from one state to other state. So, with this common national market concept, the WTO's national treatment principle will also have real meaning. What I mean to say, then GDP growth, experts say 1 to 2% in the long run, and poverty eradication because of GDP growth, and more compliance by the taxpayers, then advantages to industry. It will be much simpler tax regime, then reduction in the multiplicity of taxes, then multiple record keeping will be eliminated, then common GSTN portal, and here 49% will be government share and 51% by outsiders, this GSTN portal, and less public interface, then simplified and automated procedures, and tax burden on companies likely to come down because of elimination of cascading effect, then supply chain optimization because of uniform market or national market, then GST is applicable on imports, hence favoring imports, disfavoring domestic manufacturing will be eliminated. Then claiming of input tax credit makes the system highly transparent. You may have a doubt about input tax credit, because input tax credit comes into force when value addition takes place at each and every level. When something is taxed and subsequently some other product is manufactured by using that primary material, then whatever the taxes imposed on this primary product will be subtracted from the taxes imposed on the final product. So, I will explain you sometime later, maybe in the coming days, with some pictorial representation with regard to input tax credit, then you will be clear, right. So, these are advantages to industry. So, if you want more, please view that capsule, and let us look at the important aspect, vagaries of the job market. In fact, we are into the era of jobless growth. The biggest problem being faced, especially in a country like India, is automation. Automation is expected to take away several losses, several jobs. Job losses are expected to take place because of automation. Second important aspect is more and more jobs are being created in services sector, that to low paying jobs. Then third important aspect is more and more jobs are being created in informal sector. Informal sector jobs will not have job security. So, this is the biggest problem which India in particular and world in general are going to face. So, under these circumstances, the report by International Labour Organization assumed significance. This ILO, World Employment Social Outlook, World Employment Social Outlook for 2017, this raised several questions. And if you want something more about International Labour Organization, this is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, and formed in 1919, and it is United Nations agency. It looks at 3-4 important issues. One important issue is labour issues, and in particular, if you ask, international labour standards, whether labour are being exploited, working conditions of labour, security, social security after the person attains 60 years of age. So, all these aspects are looked after by this ILO headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. Then social protection, then work opportunities for all. So, these are the aspects looked after by International Labour Organization, and it has thrown some challenging aspects with regard to the World Employment Social Outlook and jobless growth. This is one important article you should not miss, and we deliberated during 29th week of 2016. Now, the world is heading towards jobless growth, and more automation, artificial intelligence, these are all taking away the jobs, and in future the situation is going to be too critical across the world, right. So, here I would like to differentiate between emerging countries and developing countries, because in this article there is mention of emerging countries. And what do you exactly understand by emerging countries? Can all the nations become emerging economies? Only few of them become emerging economies. Why? Because emerging countries are the countries with business activity and government's policies which promote the faster growth, government's policies which promote faster growth. Second point is stable governance. Next point is to some extent promoting foreign direct investment and foreign portfolio investment. Then another important aspect is there is scope for rapid industrialization. So, if these traits are there, then those countries are called emerging countries. So, frequently we hear about emerging economies. Quite often in newspapers you come across the term emerging economies. So, what is the meaning of emerging economies? The exact meaning is the countries with business activity in the process of rapid growth and industrialization. The countries in the process of rapid growth and industrialization, those countries are known as emerging economies, and they are becoming more and more important on the world economic stage because they cannot be ignored. The emerging economies cannot be ignored because for high returns and for the extension of multinational corporations, these emerging markets or emerging economies are becoming important for developed countries. Developed countries are dependent on these emerging economies for furthering their prospects also, in the form of investments, in the form of extending the reach of multinational corporations. So, you cannot ignore emerging countries or emerging economies. So, here they are very important because of importance, high importance and high GDP growth. Basically, developed countries look at emerging economies to further their interests with globalization and flowing of investments in the form of FPI, FDI, because on FPI, FDI, the return on investment in developed countries is much less in comparison to the return on investment in emerging market economies. I hope you understood what is meant by emerging economies. India is example of emerging economy. India, Brazil, Russia, Turkey, Mexico, South Africa, these are all examples of emerging economies. Then developing countries. Nowadays, this word has lost its relevance. In fact, World Bank is also not considering the term developing countries. This is the definition is the country where people generally have low incomes, and some developing countries like India, Brazil are being evolved into emerging markets. So, you can say emerging economies are a subset of developing countries. Emerging economies because of their stable environment, political structures, at the same time institutional mechanism with the scope of better growth prospects, they are just separate subset of developing countries, you can say. So, developing countries nowadays has lost its meaning also because World Bank no more differentiating developed countries and developing countries. Nowadays, from 2016, World Bank is classifying the countries based on 4 categories. One is low income countries, second one is lower middle income countries, third one is upper middle income countries, and the fourth one is high income countries. So, India comes under lower middle income country. So, the classification nowadays is based on this GNI per capita, gross national income per capita, and this concept of developed, then developing was lost from 2016, and in the present day era, please look at the bifurcation or division of countries based on the income. So, India is lower middle income country, and this classification was started by World Bank from 2016. So, emerging economies is something different. Emerging economies or the economies where there is a scope for high growth and where they will be attracting investments from developed countries. Right. Now, let us come back to the article. Vulnerability of workers without adequate social security benefits is the biggest problem. Vulnerability of workers. Vulnerability, what exactly is meant by it? Vulnerability means persons working in self-employed organizations. Because of globalization, several self-employed organizations are vanished or decimated. So, the persons working in self-employed organizations, persons working as temporary workers, persons working in informal sector. So, these are all examples, and persons working as contract labours. So, these are all vulnerable sections, and as per this report, the vulnerability of workers is increasing day by day. Then vulnerability of workers without adequate social security benefits is the biggest problem. Examine the reasons and remedial measures to be taken, and points emanated from the editorial. Growth in global GDP is 6-year low in 2016. Growth is not satisfactory across the world. Second point is, in fact, this article has not touched about job losses because of automation and artificial intelligence. Then 3D printing, all these things are going to take away so many jobs in future, but this article is basically talking about the vulnerability of certain sections of employees. Second point is, expectation of generation of new jobs is low. The biggest fact, and which is not palatable, is expectation of generation of new jobs is low. Then vulnerability is at present 42% of total working population. Entire world, if you see, 42% of the population are vulnerable. They are at the vulnerable stage. They are self-employed and working in unorganized sector, working as temporary or contract workers in organized sector. So, these are all vulnerable without social protection, without pensionary benefits. So, these are all vulnerable people, and the vulnerability at present across the world is 42%, though it reduced by 4% from 2015 to 2016, from 46 to 42, but not expected to reduce much in 2017. That is the biggest problem. Then no social protection to 50% of the workers in emerging economies. Just now I talked about emerging economies. That is why, because of this word only, I explained you the difference between emerging economies and developing economies. So, here no social protection to 50% of workers in emerging economies, and this is highly pertinent because in our country more than 90% workers are in unorganized sector without job protection. If you look at India, more than 90% people are working in unorganized sector without job protection. So, this is highly pertinent when you look at this article. Then 80% of workers in developing economies are no social protection. This is the biggest problem. Then 1.4 billion working people are vulnerable due to lack of proper social security. 1.4 billion. The population of the world is 7 billion. Out of the total population of 7 billion, 1.4 billion means 20% are vulnerable without social security, and this is going to be the biggest challenge across the world. And sub-Saharan Africa, then South Asia are worst affected at this juncture. India is a part of South Asia, please don't forget, right? Then the next point is, in the previous decade, proportion of vulnerability reduced by just 0.5% every year, and in future, unfortunate aspect, please read this point, in future in absolute terms they are expected to increase by 11 million a year. So, 11 million workers are going to become vulnerable in the years to come. This is going to increase 11 million a year. So, 1.4 billion, then 11 million increase will be there every year. Then reducing working poverty will be a big challenge. Without social security benefits, people are working, and 1.4 billion people are now under the problems with the social security. They are not able to get social security. So, reducing working poverty, the term working poverty is used because there is no social security, the jobs are vulnerable, and this is the biggest challenge. So, to ensure income levels at basic subsistence levels is the need of the hour. Across the world, the need of the hour is to ensure basic subsistence level. Minimum basic income must be the norm in the future. Minimum basic income. That should be the norm in the future, and this vulnerability of informal sector self-employed workers is going to be the biggest challenge which the world is going to face in the 21st century. And on jobless growth as well as vulnerability of this population, you can expect group discussion or interview also, you can be expected questions on this, right. And before concluding, I put forth this article here. An assault on RBI's autonomy after demonetization and subsequent developments are viewed as the challenge to RBI's autonomy as well as credibility of RBI. Please go through this article if you find time, because on demonetization and subsequent after effects of demonetization, we had around 4 or 5 articles in capsules of current affairs, and with regard to autonomy, we will discuss in future once we club all the articles with regard to autonomy and credibility of institutions like Reserve Bank of India in our country. Right friends, with this I am concluding today's editorial discussion. Not many articles today, because today happens to be the 100th birth anniversary of M.G. Ramachandran and Rohit Vemula, 1 year completed his suicide of Rohit Vemula. Because of all these things, several articles pertaining to these issues, I have not touched those issues. And with this today, let us conclude editorial discussion. Please do join for comprehension discussion at 12 noon. Have a nice day. Thank you. Thanks a lot.